So welcome everyone to the Dayton VA Medical Center's Learning About the PACT Act webinar. We're thrilled to be with you here tonight. I want to start by saying that this event is being recorded. So if there's something that you miss and later want to watch, you'll be able to do so, and we'll be sending you a link to this event afterward. You can also share that link with anyone that you may feel will benefit from the information that we share with you tonight. My name is Brandon Zito. I'm with the Community Outreach Office here at the Dayton VA Medical Center. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and like many of you, once had many questions about VA healthcare. So let's see if we can answer your questions this evening about PACT Act benefits and healthcare through the VA. Please realize that as a participant in this session, your microphone has been muted to minimize background noise. We have quite a few participants on this webinar, and that is why we want to keep any distracting noise at a minimum. So we want to hear from you. If you have a question or concern, you can share it with the panelists at any time through the chat pane. You should be able to find that chat pane in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Just answer your question there, type it in, and one of the presenters will be able to get with you as soon as possible. So for the sake of time, if we're not able to get to your question during the presentation, you can reach us by either phone or email, and we'll provide that contact information at the end of the presentation. So we're here tonight to talk about some very exciting news. It was a year ago that President Biden signed into law the PACT Act, which is expanding healthcare to more than 6 million veterans, many of whom were not able to receive healthcare through the VA prior. The PACT Act is perhaps the largest healthcare and benefit expansion in VA history. Full name of the law is the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, honoring our promise to address comprehensive toxins, so PACT Act. It expands and extends eligibility for VA healthcare for veterans with toxic exposure and veterans of the Vietnam, Gulf War, and post 9/11 eras. Adds more than 20 new presumptive conditions for burn pits and other toxic exposures. Adds more presumptive exposure locations for Agent Orange and radiation. Requires a VA to provide a toxic exposure screening to every veteran enrolled in VA healthcare, and helps us improve research, staff education, and treatment related to toxic exposures. For those who are already enrolled with VHA, this legislation affords many the opportunity to increase or acquire their disability rating based on presumptive conditions associated with their military service during a wide range of military conflicts and theaters of operations identified in the PACT Act. And that's why we're here tonight to talk about that, how the PACT Act might increase your access to VA healthcare and benefits. We have with us live this evening some experts to help us answer any questions you may have. First, we have Mark Rohner, our PACT Act Program Manager for the Dayton VA, and Chris Cox from Eligibility and Enrollment for the Dayton VA. Again, I'm your host, Brandon Zito, the Medical Center's Community Outreach team, and I can answer any questions about the VA here in general. Now, before we begin with any questions that you may have as attendees, Mark Rohner is going to give you a brief presentation that goes into more detail about the PACT Act. So please take it away, Mark.
All right, thank you very much. Give just a second. Greg is going to upload a brief PowerPoint. So this is just a very brief overview of what the PACT Act entails and goes just a little bit more detail than what Brandon just mentioned. Next slide, please. So as Brandon mentioned, it's Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson's promise to address comprehensive toxic exposures. Heath Robinson was a Ohio native and resident. He unfortunately passed away at the age of 39 of pulmonary related issues that were as a result of toxic exposure while serving in the Middle East. Next slide. But what this basically boils down to is the PACT Act is the VA looking at what all have those of us that have served, we've been exposed to, and being exposed to, what are those health conditions and concerns, and it's opening up those eligibility. So it's expanding the eligibility for healthcare benefits. It's helping Veteran Benefits Administration, VBA, in the decision-making process for adjudicating, making decisions and determinations for service connection. Every enrolled veteran in the healthcare is going to receive a minimum every 5 years a toxic exposure screening to see if you have any types of concerns or and what those concerns are as they directly relate to any exposures that you have. It's helping with hiring and retention of staff to work VA claims for service connection, for the healthcare benefits, and help it expedite the hiring process. We are building 31 new facilities. That's not really going to as much address people on this call. But those veterans that live way out west in the very, very rural areas of our country, this is going to be a significant impact to them. It's also helping put aside with doing those toxic exposure screenings. The VA is finding out what are the concerns of the veterans as it relates to what they were exposed to. And then from there, where do we need the VA put money into research to find out are there health related issues, things like that. Next slide. Okay, who all's affected? So the Gulf War era and the post 9/11 eligibility. What the PACT Act did is it wound up adding additional locations for eligibility for both the healthcare and service connected conditions. Previously, Jordan wasn't on there. Egypt. Well, now they are. So it expanded those, and this just shows a brief listing of the countries. Next slide. For radiation, it added and expanded some additional areas for possible radiation, and it's ionized radiation. Next slide. Okay, for the Vietnam era, as Brandon mentioned, it added some additional locations for possible Agent Orange exposure. Thailand, it was probably the biggest one, or the one that's going to affect the most number of Vietnam era veterans. But it also added two more presumptive conditions. And what those two were monoclonal gamma of undetermined significance, mucus, but then hypertension. That was the big one that affects a tremendous amount of veterans from the Vietnam era as a presumptive condition. Next slide. Okay, and so when I mentioned presumptive condition, what does that mean? Well, with the PACT Act, and as Brandon mentioned, they added over 20 different additional presumptive conditions. What a presumptive condition is going to mean is basically if you have a medical condition that is diagnosed, it is going to be presumed, hence the word presumptive, that that condition was as a result of incurred or aggravated because of your time and service in the military. If veteran benefits can see that you were in a certain place at a certain time frame and you have this type of condition, and this is where it's listing definitely the most common ones, and you have one of these conditions, it will be presumed that that was because of your military service. So the burden of proof does not fall on the veteran to show how or why this type of health condition was related to your military time. Next condition or slide, sorry. Okay, the toxic exposure screening. What that is real quick, it's going to be at least once every 5 years. Depending on how you answer, it may be every single year. And usually this will go during your primary care appointment. But if you don't see a primary care provider regularly, it'll be during one of those specialty care clinics. But provider's just going to ask you some brief questions. Do you think you were exposed to anything while we were in the military? If so, do you have any particular health concerns that they need to be aware of? And depending on those answers, then what would you like done? Do you want some information about how to file for benefits? Do you need to see someone about getting on a formal registry? If it's health concerns and I'm your primary care provider, or it's in the specialty care clinic, do we need to do some detailed testing for those health conditions and concerns? So that's what the exposure screening is. Here's a breakdown of the basic registries that are mandated by Congress and what they entail. And it's a brief highlight to show kind of the timeframes or the era of when you served on which ones you would qualify for. In addition, you also have garrison exposures, and that's where Camp Lejeune is a very common one. There is not an actually congressionally mandated VA health registry for Camp Lejeune, but there are garrison exposures of those that served at Camp Lejeune, and there are presumptive conditions that a veteran can be service connected for if they served at Camp Lejeune during a certain time frame. And we can go into detail later on if there's any questions about that. Next slide. So what you would want to do for any veterans, looking at these for these new presumptive conditions, if you've never filed for those, but you served in those areas, you're going to want to file. If you did previously filed for it and were denied, at this time, you want to refile for it. Veteran Benefits Administration, the VA, is not going to go back to all those previously denied claims and reopen them. You, the veteran, are going to want to, and I would recommend you see a veteran service organization such as American Legion, DAV, the VFW, one of those national organizations to assist you with filing for a claim, but you're going to want to file a supplemental claim. Next slide. Okay, other people that were affected. So with the addition of 20 different types of cancers, this, with the PACT Act, it's opening up available eligibility for survivors, dependents, for them to be able to file for DIC benefits, dependency and indemnity compensation, as well as additional burial benefits from, unfortunately, a monetary reimbursement rate. So if anyone on this call has a friend, a family member that passed away from one of these now added presumptive conditions, and they have a surviving spouse, they would want to think about filing for those conditions, those survivor benefits. Okay, and this is just reiterating again, if you filed for one of these conditions and you were previously denied, the VA is not going to reopen that claim. You, the veteran, are going to have to reopen it. But this is where, again, I encourage you to see one of those veteran service organizations, or you can speak to VBA directly, Dayton VA Medical Center has a VBA representative there on site Tuesdays through Thursdays, 8 to 4. But you want to talk to them. Depending on why you were previously denied is going to depend on the type of paperwork you're going to have to file when you do your supplemental claim. A veteran can do a claim themselves. It's their right. There's no reason why you can't submit a claim on your own. The only thing is, if it's on the wrong form, then it's going to be caused to be kicked back, rejected, and then you're going to have to, start from scratch over again of refiling on the proper paperwork. And that's where using one of those organizations, they're trained, they're knowledgeable, they're accredited, they know the proper paperwork that it needs to be submitted on. Next slide. And this is some general information for people with any types of questions. You have the PACT Act Program Office, two numbers there, the Eligibility and Enrollment Office, their primary number. You can file a claim again on your own if you want, or if you want to seek out one of the local veteran service officers. And then also for information on the specific registries, there's a web link where you can go and get that additional information. But that's basically the PACT Act in a quick nutshell.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark, for that informative presentation. We appreciate it. So let's take some time to answer questions. And we've received a few already. So remember, if you have a question, to ask it in the chat pane. Again, that should be in the bottom right of your screen. And again, if we do not get to your question due to time constraints, we do want to answer it, and we'll give you a way to contact us at the end of this presentation. So I've got a question here from Tim. He asks, is there a cutoff date to register for the PACT Act?
I can go from a benefits standpoint, there is no deadline for filing. However, there was a deadline for retroactive earnings of the PACT Act that would have taken those earnings back to when the PACT Act was signed into law by the president, which was August 22nd, or August 10th of 2022. That deadline has since passed. But as far as a dead straight deadline, there is none. You can apply for any of these service-connected benefits at any time.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how long does Title 10 deployment for a Guard member have to last to be eligible for VA health care?
Okay, I can take that. For eligible for VHA healthcare, they have to have served their entire duration of the deployment.
Okay. So not a specific number of days, just
they got deployed for a 6-month tour, and they deployed to a combat area or one of those areas underneath with the PACT Act, the Gulf War area, one of those qualifying countries, they are going to be eligible if they serve the entire duration of their deployment.
How can I tell if I'm on the Agent Orange registry is another question.
Okay, so for the Agent Orange registry to see if you are eligible, you would want to contact in the last slide that had the contact numbers, either extension 3259 or 5807, and one of us can see if you are on the registry. Or you can always ask your primary care provider if they can put a referral in to the Toxic Exposure Registry program, and we will get to you. There is a significant backlog. We get a tremendous, overwhelming number every day. We're slowly working that, but we would then look you up. See if you're on a registry. If you're on the registry, we're going to contact you, let you know you're on the registry. If you're not on it, then we'll contact you and do the steps depending on which registry you're qualified. Now, Agent Orange, yeah, we would that can be placed with a phone call to put you on the registry.
This question asks, so Camp Lejeune contaminated water is not a part of the PACT Act?
Camp Lejeune contaminated water had a small area related to the PACT Act, but what it did was setting aside some monetary funding for it. But with Camp Lejeune, if you served from 1957 to, I believe, or 1954 to 87, I think is the time frame for Camp Lejeune, and you have one of their presumed medical conditions, or a spouse or a child that was living with you at that time, you can file for those benefits.
Chris, I think this one is for you. Joe has asked, how does a veteran get enrolled into the VA?
Hi, Joe. Yep, great question. The best way to enroll in the VA for healthcare. So our eligibility and enrollment department, which is where I work at, if you come down to our office, we're open from 8 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. All you'll have to do is bring your DD 214 with you and a form of ID. Come down, we'll hand you a form that's called a 1010 EZ. We'll have you fill that out for us with your income as well. Give us that information, and then we can put you in our system and see if you're eligible and able to be enrolled in our system. There's also a number that we can also put in there as well. Yep, there it is. So you can call our extension as well, and we can email or mail you out a 1010 EZ form, which is also called a means test. You just have to give us a call, and then we'll get you all squared away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Another question. I'm already service connected for the Gulf War. Why should I join a registry is the question.
So being service connected for a medical condition is separate from being on a health registry. Now, when we talk about all the presumptives and the things like that, one of the ways that those medical conditions get on a presumptive list is veterans enrolling in being on these registries. That's one of the areas for the data collection. A registry mainly has two primary goals. One is to data collection for us, Department of Veteran Affairs. What health conditions are these veterans that were in this area exposed to versus this group of veterans that were deployed to this area, 500 miles north? What are the differences? What are the health conditions that everyone's coming down with? So there's that. But also it helps educate you, the veteran. You're going to meet with a toxic exposure specialist. They're going to do basically a brief health history on you. They're going to see if they can identify any known conditions that you have. And actually, hopefully you don't have the conditions. But they'll also let you know, should you ever develop this type of symptom, or this, you can be more educated. It could be related or the beginnings of this type of health condition, kind of brewing its head. But also you can then contact your primary care doctor, whether it's in the VA or not in the VA, but to try and get ahead of it, hopefully maybe minimize or delay the disease process of these illnesses. But it's so that way you can also become educated. So even though you're service connected for Gulf War and some of those conditions, you still want to join that registry. And this is just a random example. Say enough people get on a registry, they find out a certain unit was deployed to a certain area. And again, this is just random. Suddenly they're all developing one very unusual specific type of toe fungus. That's how they decide, okay, well, we're starting to see a pattern here. Maybe we need to look at this a little further down the road. And again, that was a very random, off the top of my head example, but that's how some of these registries work. It took almost half a century for hypertension to be added for the Agent Orange. But it was enough people getting on these registries, enough for them to see the patterns, enough veterans filing for service connection for hypertension for us, the VA, to be able to make those connections.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Mark. Chris, I think this might be for you. Can a non-enrolled veteran just pay out of pocket for a screening?
So you do not have to be enrolled to sign up for the registry or do a screening. It is beneficial to get enrolled while you're there, but no, you do not have to be enrolled to get a screening or be seen for the PACT Act.
But just paying out of pocket for a screening, is that something that's possible?
So, Mark, to my knowledge, they shouldn't be paying for the screening at all, should they?
Screening, no. A registry as well, no. So if you were in a qualifying country for a registry, yeah, it is completely free of charge, and you do not need to be enrolled for that registry in the health assessment for that registry. As far as a toxic exposure screening, and this is where, unless you know something above me, right now, if you are not enrolled, you cannot get the screening done. And that's the difference. The screening is not nearly as detailed as having a registry evaluation and assessment. But for a registry evaluation and assessment, there is qualifying factors. You have to be part of a certain demographic area and group to qualify for that registry. But the screening, which isn't nearly as comprehensive, though, you do have to be already enrolled in the VA. But hopefully with the PACT Act and its expansion and opening up the doors in a lot of other eligibility requirements, those veterans that are not enrolled will be able to get enrolled so that we can do the screenings.
Okay, great. So it looks like we're down to the last question, unless someone else wants to add an additional question. Brad says he was at Camp Pendleton and they burned everything. Can he sign up for the burn pit registry?
Based on that information, the answer is no. Again, a registry is for a specific demographic group. So that's going to be a group of veterans that served during a specific time frame in a specific area, specific location. This is done, and those rules were created by Congress. Now, you served at Camp Pendleton and you have a disease process, a diagnosed medical illness that is on the presumptive list for the Airborne Hazards Open Burn Pit registry. You could certainly file for that condition, and I would encourage you to file for that condition. However, because Camp Pendleton does not meet the guidelines for the presumptive condition, that burden of proof of why your medical condition, say it's asthma, just for an example, why that asthma is related to your time at Camp Pendleton and when they were burning everything at Camp Pendleton. That burden of proof is on you to prove. And that's where meeting with a veteran service organization or talking with a VBA, they should provide you that guidance and help you with providing that burden of proof. You would want to look up some various, articles about Camp Pendleton, some of the health effects, things like that, write statements. There's just a gamut of how you would do that to provide that burden. But if you're at Camp Pendleton, but then you went over to Kuwait and were in Kuwait for 3 months during a time frame, say 1994, well, you're going to fall under the guidelines for the Airborne Hazards Open Burn Pit Registry in the Gulf War presumptives. You don't have to provide that burden of proof.
Gotcha.
And that's where with these toxic exposure screenings, the VA can see what are the concerns. And then just random, wow, there's a lot of people that served at Camp Pendleton. They all have the same health concern and are worried about this type of health condition. That helps the VA for that research to look into that information.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not see any additional questions in the chat. So I think that's all the time we have for this evening's session. One thing I would like to say, though, is we will be having a Middletown event, a PACT Act event in Middletown this weekend. This particular event that we're having currently on this webinar has been marketed to the Middletown area, to the Butler and Warren County areas. So those veterans who are participating now should be in the general Middletown area. This weekend, Saturday, the 26th of August, we will be having a PACT Act event from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It is at the American Legion in Middletown. That is at 116 South Main Street. Our preference is that you register a time so that you can come in and be seen in a timely fashion by the staff there. We will have VBA, veteran service officers. We will have toxic screeners, appointment makers. Eligibility and enrollment will be there as well. So please register for that event. I can give you the phone number to reach out to if you would like to have assistance provided to you for registration for that. And that number is 937-658-5189. Again, that is this weekend in Middletown at the American Legion. So back to this webinar. If we did not get to your question, not to worry. If you have any questions regarding the PACT Act that you would like to ask at another time, you can contact our PACT Act program office at 937-268-6511. And the extensions are 5807 or 3259. That is extensions 5807 or 3259. And to file a claim through VBA through the PACT Act, go to www.va.gov/PACT. That's www.va.gov/PACT. As a reminder, filing a claim through the PACT Act does not automatically enroll you in VA healthcare. Claims only determine eligibility for benefits through the PACT Act. You must still apply for healthcare benefits through the Veterans Health Administration. For information about applying for VA healthcare, You may call our eligibility and enrollment office at 937-267-7608 for questions about how to enroll with the Dayton VA. For those who may not be currently enrolled with the Dayton VA for healthcare, there are several options for enrolling. I believe Chris mentioned them earlier. But if you are not currently enrolled, but would like to enroll, here's how you can do it. In person, at the maroon desk in our facility here at the Dayton VA, online, the call center, and by postal mail. You can also enroll in the surrounding community-based outpatient clinics, also known as CBOCs. They are located in Lima, Middletown, Richmond, and Springfield. So thanks to all our panelists for a great information that they have shared with us this evening. And thanks again to everyone who attended this event. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks to all of our veterans for their service to a grateful nation.
Thank you.